right, so I would like to welcome Laura Barasa. She's willing to present at the seminar today her research on mobile money payments, and everyone else who joined the workshop today. So we had a longer break with the workshops, but now we resume, and we have a program related mainly to digital microeconomics, things related to payment systems and so on. So everybody, please join this week as well as in the next week. The seminars are usually 1 hour, so 45 minutes for presentations and then 15 minutes for question and answers. You can ask questions at the end, or if you want to ask something to clarify in the meantime, you can always, I think, ask Laura any question. So just feel free to speak up or raise your hand. If you cannot, then I will read your question if you post it on chat. All right, thanks a lot. So Laura, you can present your paper.
All right. So you said I have about 1 hour, 15 minutes?
45 minutes, but 45 I think you can take your time. We're not so strict about this.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I think that's 45 minutes is more than enough. My name is Laura Barasa, and I'm a member of the formerly School of Economics, but now the Department of Economics, Population and Development Studies at the University of Nairobi. And I mainly teach econometrics and quantitatives and advanced microeconomics. And my main research interest revolves around farm level performance and especially innovation. I also do quite a bit in governance. And my interest in the past has been looking at how digital innovations can enhance farm performance. So this is what I explore in this study, where I sought to find out if mobile money can be used to circumvent petty corruption. So in general, this study looks at bribery, which involves making informal payments. So this is a form of petty corruption. It's not grand corruption, but it's petty corruption that can involve small amounts of money, but which can result into a huge volume of money exchanged to get things done. And particularly, this is to influence the actions of a public official. So for instance, when people, households or companies and enterprises are looking for water connections or electricity connections, they may have to grease the palms of the public officials to get things done faster. When it comes to tax officials visiting an enterprise, at times we may have some monetary exchange to have some procedures overlooked. So this is what this study focuses on. So in general, there's a strand of literature which argues that petty corruption is bad for the growth of enterprises because it takes away resources that could be used in production and diverts them into unproductive activities. But then there's also another strand of literature which says that petty corruption can actually spur farm growth. It can actually help farms to grow, especially when we have bureaucratic red tape that results in inefficiencies. So giving money to get something done faster might actually be profitable for the farm. So these two strands of literature contrast each other, but they are not really the focus of the study. Here, what the main thing is that bribery, anyway, is unethical, but we see that it is very normal in the setting of developing countries, in Africa, in my country, Kenya. And it will generally happen in cash-based economies, and we will see the reasons why that is the case. So looking at some of the interventions that have been there in the past, particularly in Kenya, the national government gives solutions which target government transparency and accountability. So there are sort of very limited options for addressing corruption or for limiting it. And the most common that we can use in this country is visit an official ombudsman and report, or maybe let the non-governmental organizations know about it and they can report it to higher powers or report to the same government offices where the corruption is being done. So those are sort of very limited options that individuals have and more so enterprises have for addressing corruption. So to whom do you report to? And even if you report, what is done? And the main issue is, can something be done? Is there anything within an individual's power to circumvent or avoid situations which can result in corruption? So the main motivation here is that when we talk about the exchange of cash, this is informal payments, it remains undocumented and can even be done anonymously. So you can intentionally conceal information pertaining to these deals which are done under the table. And again, people underestimate being caught. So what if there's a way that we could document these transactions efficiently and in a cost-effective manner? And again, the question is there a way that enterprises could exploit something to circumvent bribery? So just try sort of avoid it altogether instead of having to go to court and to report these practices. And I guess this can also help enterprises in that if there's a solution that could help them avoid the practice altogether, then they avoid all the costs that come together with reporting the practices or that encourage them to engage in the practices of bribery. So I thought of an experience that a friend went through once. They were pulled over by a traffic policeman. And of course, they had, I think there was an offense, one or another, and they were asked to pay a fine. So during this time, the government of Kenya had come up with a system where we could use mobile money to pay for fines which relate to traffic offenses. But interestingly, the mobile money system for making those particular payments simply just never used to work. It was always jammed or it was always hanging. So this policeman asked the driver to make the payment and they couldn't. And he said, okay, fine, we'll need to go to the police station unless you give me a small, you buy me tea. We say, buy me tea, that is pay me this bribe. A small bribe, maybe of about $10. That's about 1,000 Kenyan shillings. So the driver agreed to do this, and the only money they had was on their mobile phone. So they said, give me your telephone number, then I can send you the money. So we mainly use M-Pesa, that's from Safaricom. And he said, I can M-Pesa you or send you this mobile money. And the traffic policeman said, no, that won't be helpful because you will have my name, we will have a timestamp, we will know the amount, and it can be traced back to me. So what the officer had in mind, the suggestion was this: let us drive to a mobile money agent or an ATM for the offending party to withdraw the money and give it to the policeman in cash. And that is what happened. So you see that even in an environment where we have a mobile money system dedicated to paying court fines for traffic offenses through mobile money, it just won't work. But then again, what was of interest to me at this point was that this police officer did not want to receive cash through mobile money because their details would be taken down and that could be used as evidence somewhere. So for me, this motivated the question that could the solution to fighting petty corruption lie in the adoption of mobile money systems? And indeed in Kenya, we have a mobile money subscription rate of over 100%. And in Africa in general, mobile money adoption has outpaced that of all other countries in the rest of the world. So this is where the interest in this question came up. And I felt that, yeah, I think it is possible to test this idea using available data. So in general, when you conduct a mobile money transaction, it is backed by a huge digital trail of records. So we have a timestamp, we have the name of the person sending the money. You can even be able to find the geographical location of where the transaction takes place from the person who is sending to the recipient. So these records mainly make mobile money transactions very traceable. They are transparent. And you can imagine a context where enterprise managers have to meet government officials, such as tax officials, custom officials, or any officials in charge of utility connections, such as water and electricity. That environment can give rise to a situation where it is possible for them to ask for informal payments or bribes. But in this case, then using mobile money can actually reduce the opportunity space where corruption thrives. So it can potentially eliminate the need for physical meetings. And then again, the question is then, if there's an intervention which enterprises can directly control and it can help them overcome petty corruption, then it will definitely deserve special attention. So here, the crux of the study was to investigate this question: what is the impact of mobile money use on petty corruption, and particularly at the enterprise level, considering that enterprises carry out many transactions when it comes to registration, when they are seeking for business permits, trying to meet regulations, paying taxes. Everything they do is intertwined with the government, and this gives that environment of corruption. It encourages corruption in one way or another. So looking at an intervention that firms can directly control would be well worth it. So some of the literature, theoretical literature that looks at the interventions that already exist, we have 3 types, and the key ones are the top-down intervention. So in this type of intervention, what happens is that the mechanism by which management holds government officials accountable is enhanced. So we have contracts. We also have codes of conduct where government officials are expected to behave in an ethical manner. There may be workplace controls, and this should serve to reduce the opportunity space for corruption. Most of this can be manifested by you walking into a compound where a government office is situated. And we normally have these very huge signs which say that corruption is not entertained, we do not condone corruption, report corruption practices here. So those are all over the place, but in my own experience, they're just warnings, but we know that they really don't accomplish much. The second type of intervention that is available is the social accountability intervention. So in this case, awareness campaigns are created just to enhance capacity building, to encourage citizens to denounce corruption. And in this case, citizens are also encouraged to hold government officials accountable. So encouraging citizen engagement in these processes is supposed to help, is supposed to be a good intervention towards to circumvent or to avoid corruption or to reduce corruption in an environment. The third one is the behavioral intervention. So in this one also, we have education and media campaigns where we have information that is communicated to elicit decision makers' response to corruption in a way that discourages them from engaging in corrupt practices. So this is supposed to appeal to the mental nodes and social and cultural norms, which again can take time to change or can be difficult to change. And again, looking at behavioral interventions, it's important to figure out how the message is supposed to be crafted. So what kind of a message will discourage people from engaging in corruption? And these will be the citizens and government officials. So looking at these this type of interventions, I will say that one thing that stands out is a practical tool that can be used to help people avoid corruption is definitely missing. And while it is important for people to learn not to engage in corrupt practices, we note that at times the environment itself does not support that, in that when you engage in a transaction, at some point, one may feel that the only way to accomplish what I've set out to do is to pay a bribe. And some of these interventions might not be very practical, especially if we are to consider a higher level like a firm or an enterprise, as opposed to individuals. So some interesting empirical literature regarding this study. When I looked out, I found two relevant studies. So one interesting one was by Blumenstock, where he used a randomized control trial to study Afghanistan. So policemen, the payment program for policemen in Afghanistan was transitioning from cash payments to mobile money payments. So initially, the senior officials will have the money in form of cash, and they would use that to pay salaries to junior policemen. But once mobile money payments were instituted in a way that the salaries directly went to the junior policemen, the junior policemen were shocked, and they thought at first that they had received salary increments. But later on, they realized that what they had received was their full salary entitlement. And this was because high-ranking policemen used to systematically take payouts and steal from the junior officers without their knowledge. So in this study, the whole payroll was migrated to mobile money, and some of these things came out that money used to be stolen. And another similar study was conducted in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam. So this mobile money was used to make utility payments for water. And again, in this case, it was noted that there was a huge reduction in the incidence of petty corruption, people asking for reconnections and being requested to make some informal payments. Since everything was going to proceed on mobile money, then the money will be sent directly to the utility company rather than an individual. So this helped people to circumvent corruption and to avoid it altogether. So these two studies show that there's actually room, there's a space for mobile money to be used as a tool for fighting petty corruption. So looking at the theoretical review and the empirical review, I attempted to come up with these results chain, just illustrating the theory of change. And I'm sure there are some things which I'd be happy to hear from you, some suggestions on how I could improve this. So the inputs that are very important for an enterprise would be the financial and human resources, and more importantly, the mobile money technology that a firm would need to acquire. And this is not very complicated because what they need is a dedicated mobile line that can be registered to make and receive payments in form of mobile money. And the activity will be to use the mobile money payment services for government services in particular. And one of the things that should come out of this, the main output, is the increased digital accounting records, which are in real time, and there's really no room for manipulation here. One outcome then would be improved transparency and traceability of transactions. You can know what time the transactions were made and the originator and the receiver of the money. So the final outcome, which this study is interested in, is the reduction in bribe payments and having a lower incidence of petty corruption, which is the amount of money that firms are paying in terms of informal payments should reduce if they are to adopt mobile money. So here, the main hypothesis of this study then was that mobile money has a negative impact on informal payments. So these are the payments we make to get things done, when indeed we should not, because these are public services or government services that should not be paid for. So to investigate this question, I was lucky enough to have this data from the World Bank Enterprise Survey. So the firms which are surveyed here are representative of the country's private sector. And the survey strategy here, they use the stratified random sampling technique, where firms are stratified by geographical location, by size, and by sector. So the survey's instrument here collect data on firm characteristics, let's say the age of the firm, the legal status, more importantly, do they use mobile money and for what specifically? business government relations, how often do government officials visit these firms, and again, the business environment. So the primary respondents to these surveys are usually the business owners or the top managers. And what was interesting was that there were two waves of data. The first wave, which I call the baseline, collected data between 2004 and 2006. This was before the launch of mobile money. Then we have the launch of mobile money in Kenya, actually the first country in East Africa to have mobile money. That was in 2007. Then after that, the next World Bank Enterprise Survey was conducted in 2013. It's titled 2013 World Bank Enterprise Survey, but it contains data collected for the period 2010 to 2012. So in this way, I was able to construct a baseline and an end line. And the firms that matched, that appeared in both surveys were 151, but the balance of the firms that were not included in the analysis did not report on bribe payments or informal payments in both periods. So basically, the launch of mobile money happened in between the two data points, and that is what we exploit to test the impact of mobile money on bribe payments. So here are the variables of interest. We have the treatment, which is mobile money, the use of mobile money for financial transactions. So there's an array of questions which asks specifically, does this firm use mobile money for any financial transaction? So this is a binary variable which I use in this study. But the other questions relate to whether the firm uses mobile money for utility payments, to pay salaries, to receive payments from customers, and so on. And the outcome variable here, the percentage of total annual sales paid as informal payments. So this is an approximation that is reported as the amount, as an approximation of the percentage of total sales. So the question goes like, on average, what percentage of total annual sales or yearly sales do you pay out as informal payments? And this is where there was a catch, in that about 20 enterprises refused to answer the question. Others said they didn't know and had missing data. So coming from a panel of 151, that is how we went down to having 104 firms that reported on this measure in both the baseline and the end line. Then we have the pretreatment covariates. These are mainly firm characteristics, such as the age of the firm, the size of the firm, the type of ownership, whether they are exporters, the legal status, managerial experience, do they access credit, and then also looking at sector dummies. So all these are the main variables that I used in the analysis. So to talk about the type of analysis I conducted here, I basically investigated the impact using a matched difference in difference econometric technique. And one of the main motivations for doing so was that we could use the difference in difference estimator to get the mean difference in the outcome, that is in informal payments, across participants and non-participants within the area of common support. And this was just to ensure that we have a comparison group that is a valid, forms a valid counterfactual. So the main assumption here is that the launch of mobile money in Kenya was not in any way related to the outcome variable of interest, really. It was not related to petty corruption. So mobile money was not designed to fight corruption in any way. If anything, it was designed to improve financial inclusion in Kenya. So here I argue that this study then does not suffer from simultaneous causality. Then the benefit of using the matched difference in difference design is that when we match these firms based on pretreatment variables, we can create a valid comparison group. And the difference in difference technique helps us to correct for differences that are fixed over time, which reduces the risk of bias. So essentially, this study exploited the launch of mobile money in 2007 as a means of identifying the impact of mobile money use on petty corruption. So the first step that I took in analyzing this data was to inspect the balance in baseline characteristics. So essentially, the treatment and the comparison group did not have statistically significant differences. And this is an indication that suggests that farms were representative of the population from which they were selected, and in that they seem to have been on the same level even to start with. So however, we note that if you look at the probability, if you look at the p-value for bribe payments, it was non-significant, but at 13%. And that may raise a query that perhaps there could have been a difference if all the farms were included. But looking at the econometric technique that we use, it basically reduces that threat. And that is mainly why I chose to use that the match difference in difference technique. So one important thing by using the match difference in difference technique, I'll spend a bit of time here, is that we have to test, to check the parallel trends assumption. That would be, we need to make sure that the treatment farms and the comparison farms, that is the farms which use mobile money and those that do not, were similar to start with. So prior to the launch of mobile money, were these farms similar to start with? But unfortunately, we need 2 points of data prior to the launch of mobile money, and this data was not available. So I had to resort to falsification tests where we need to observe a zero treatment effect. And one of the things I did was to use a placebo treatment group or a fake treatment group. And one of the countries that launched mobile money following Kenya, and might be a bit similar to Kenya, is Malawi. So farms in Malawi took up mobile money in about 2012. So I created a fake treatment group for farms in Malawi. And we note that most of the mobile applications in Malawi were at their early stages and still are in comparison to Kenya. So these farms were used to create a fake treatment group, and running our analysis, there was no statistically significant result. The other falsification test, apart from using a fake treatment group, was to use a placebo outcome, that is a fake outcome. So you use an outcome that is theoretically affected by the treatment. So in this case, the outcome that I chose was power outages. So theoretically, power outages should not be affected by mobile money use. And in Kenya, power outages are a very common phenomena. And there's really no theoretical link between the use of mobile money and the occurrence of power outages. So in both specifications, we observed that there was a zero impact observed in these two tests. So while these might not be enough, this is the best that could be done with this data. So the results of the main analysis now, using the data from Kenya, actually revealed that mobile money had a negative effect on bribe payments for these enterprises. And I also ran a few other robustness checks using the inverse probability weighting technique, and I also used some multiple imputation technique and the Horowitz-Mansky bounds for the 48 farms that had missing data on informal payments. And incidentally, the results remain statistically significant and the impact remains negative throughout all the analysis. So this gives an indication that the results are robust to using other techniques, and we have something, we can infer something from them. So that, looking at the results, the main conclusion and the main discussion of this paper centers around the negative and statistically significant effect of mobile money on petty corruption. And here, what we infer is that mobile money payment deters petty corruption. And some of the discussion that comes about is that perhaps the case is that people can no longer underestimate being caught, and mobile money then discourages them from engaging in petty corruption because of the digital records that come about, which actually require very stringent authentication and registration procedures. So these transactions can be traced using names and using timestamps, including geographical locations. So mobile money basically eliminates the anonymity of transactions that is inherent in petty corruption. So it sort of lifts the veil on petty corruption and who is engaging in it, at what time, what amounts are exchanged. And it increases then the probability of being caught and being punished, which of course is a deterrent and can add on to the theories of petty corruption interventions. So what are the implications for policy then? One of the things that we notice that digital innovations such as mobile money then are actually useful in enhancing transparency and accountability. So these are mechanisms that can be used by government institutions to enhance performance in other ways. For instance, it's a common fact that government officials generally engage in practices that are corrupt. So at the level of petty corruption, mobile money can be a useful deterrent. And even if government, one was to argue that government officials can instead use their own telephone lines, it means that the sender of the money will have their details and they can use that as evidence in a court of law for reporting. And if there are any investigations to be conducted for parties that are willing to engage in corruption, if they are to be reported, then there will be evidence against these practices, so which makes it actionable in court. The other thing for governments considering investment in ICT infrastructure, for instance, in Kenya, the ICT infrastructure, especially mobile money infrastructure, is very well developed. However, there are still areas where the mobile network is not so good, but this can be improved upon because there are other benefits to be gained by doing so, with particular focus on governance. We also have implications for practice. So for instance, using mobile money and even just mobile telephones essentially reduces the time that is spent dealing with government officials. So if this time is reduced, then it is also possible that mobile money reduces the opportunity space for corruption by reducing the need for physical meetings, which can result in time savings for government officials and also managers of enterprises. Again, from this study, we also infer that mobile money will definitely enhance monitoring and detection of informal payments. And I would want to actually conclude by saying that one thing that I learned from literature was that mobile money was developed with the aim of enhancing financial inclusion. But it turns out that it can play many other roles, which are largely unknown. So some of its current applications were unknown at the time of its design. For instance, in Kenya right now, we have what we call an e-citizen platform where you can register for just about any government service. For instance, applying for passports, you want to apply for land registration, you want to change your car logbook or to sell a vehicle, anything pertaining to government, you can actually register online and make mobile money payments, which reduces the need for people to visit offices and mingle with government officials, which also reduces the opportunity space for corruption, because once you register, you're given a dedicated line where you send the money and you receive your official receipt. So this has been of help to citizens as well. And also just to emphasize this idea, during the pandemic, the government of Kenya encouraged us citizens to use mobile money for all our purchases and other transactions to curb the spread of the coronavirus. So who really knew that mobile money would have these benefits for us? I would like to thank all of you for your attention. And this research was sponsored by the African Economic Research Consortium. And I got a lot of technical support from Professor Guhalia from the University of Birmingham. And this paper is under consideration for potential publication. And I look forward to receiving your feedback on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura, for a very clear presentation and clear policy recommendations. I would like to open the floor for any questions there might be. I also have some questions, but maybe if there's anybody else who would like to ask first, please speak up or raise your hand.
So I have a question, very interesting research question, and you do a very nice job answering the question. I totally agree that some of the concerns that you have, the DIF is going to solve most of the concerns. Something that still a concern for me is that firms can be different in other things that we do not observe, as they have like they implement the mobile money, and they also have like they can be also more corrupt. I don't know, something like that. My question is that I did not see, or maybe I missed something, but you don't have fixed effects for the firms, right? Another way that you could solve for this selection, that firms might be different in terms of the selection of using the mobile money and also the corruption, would be to use like instrumental variable. So you mentioned that internet's not so reliable in some parts of the country. So maybe you could use the price of the internet access, or like the reliability of the internet as an IV to the mobile money adoption. If you have like any like if you deal with that in some other way, just I'm sorry, I just missed something, but I think you could do these strategies in order to avoid this issue of internet adoption is also correlated with something else that you are observing, like corruption. Very nice presentation. I really enjoyed the paper.
Would you like to respond, Laura, to the question?
Yeah, sure. So thank you very much for that suggestion. And it's something which I had explored previously, and I think I would want to revisit that. Because some of the suggestions that I have received from reviewers also talk about exploring the use of an IV. And the suggestion you've given is good. I had not thought of using that, the reliability of the internet connection. However, one thing I had explored initially was looking at the rollout of the network, of the mobile network in Kenya. And that is still something that I'm exploring. Thank you.
We have time for other questions. Anybody else would like to ask something? Okay,
I mean, just a quick thought, I think, Lucas, rather than a question. I mean, very, very interesting presentation. Thank you, Laura. And I particularly appreciated the very obvious link between the research work in question and actionable responses that governments and other organizations can put in place. So thank you very much for taking the time to describe it. I'm just wondering if you've thought about how the research could be expanded to include organized crime, money laundering, that kind of thing. I guess it's not really an issue for this paper in particular, but I would imagine that the issue interlinks with a much broader set of financial crimes than just corruption with government officials. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. I think, yeah, that's an interesting angle to look at because I think this would also help in handling issues such as illicit flows, I guess. And yeah, I had not thought about that, but that's an interesting thought. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I also have questions, so maybe before anybody else asks. One question is, because you started the motivation with petty corruption, and I understood this by the example that you described, like this is usually individuals who are corrupting policemen or government officials for whatever reasons. And then you started talking about firms. So you didn't describe, so I didn't get really what kind of firms are this in your sample. Are they like small enterprises, and what kind of corruptions activities this may be? If so, is it really petty corruption or is it something else? I don't know whether you could clarify this. And second thing is about, so you mentioned that there's 151 firms in total who appear in 2 waves of this survey that are the same. Mm-hmm. So I understand that this is indeed panel data, but following up question of Lucas, it wasn't clear to me whether you explore the fact that it's panel data, so using some fixed effects or in some other way. That's my second question. And third question is maybe related also to Lucas' question. So as I understand, your main impact variable is adoption of mobile money by the firm, and your dependent variable is the share of expenditure on corruption, essentially. So I would think that this is indeed endogenous. Possibly firms adopt mobile money if they probably are less corrupt or something like this. So there's some like issue of endogeneity, which was discussed by Lucas, but also you said that some firms, they are not willing to report, and there may be also like some sort of selection bias. So I don't know whether you treated this in your study. I mean, the selection bias, who reports and who doesn't report, and how to test this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lucas, for those questions. So one of the things, yeah, I start off the discussion by focusing on what happens to individuals, because for me, that was where the idea for this study began, because we noticed that anywhere that you had to use mobile money for government services, the mobile money system would not work at times. It would be difficult to even get the correct details to send the money to. And that is when it came out that some government officials would not want people to use them. And yeah, so this brought the idea to me, this idea that what if this was to be escalated to firms so that they could have something to help them circumvent petty corruption. So indeed, the discussion begins by looking at studies that focus on individuals. And in literature, there are actually no studies that look at enterprises. So these will be among the first that specifically focus on enterprises rather than individuals. So that would be the reason why. And talking about using the panel data or exploiting the panel data, so that so the way this method works is we are able to match the firms that have adopted mobile money, and we know the firms, which firms they are in the endline data, especially after the launch of mobile money, and we extrapolate this, and we know that in the baseline period without mobile money. These are the firms that eventually adopted mobile money. So the most we can do is be able to tell the characteristics of firms which adopt mobile money, but using a fixed effects, a panel data fixed effects model will not really be possible in this case, at least from what I see. And that is where the suggestion to use the IV could do a better job. And I believe that that will give me a good avenue of conducting robustness checks that could give credibility to the findings. And of course, you're correct to say that it's very possible that firms that adopt mobile money maybe initially were engaging in more corruption, or those that refuse to are firms that engage in more petty corruption, and they don't want to adopt mobile money to avoid being on the radar. So the method that I use tries to overcome some of these challenges, but however, it cannot effectively deal with the unobserved factors. And yeah, that is one limitation of the study that I highlight. And it also makes it a bit difficult to extrapolate these results to the entire population of enterprises involved. So the kind of enterprises that this study deals with are those in the manufacturing sector, in the retail sector, and those in the services sector. And it includes micro enterprises, less than 5 employees, to medium-sized enterprises, those less than 20 employees, to large enterprises. So it covers the whole spectrum, and we are able to control for these effects in the analysis. Yeah, I hope that answers you to some extent.
Thank you for your answers. So I used my time. If there's anybody else who would like to ask questions, please speak up. All right, I guess there are no other questions. So maybe I can just make my final comment. As I understand, this survey stretches across many countries, not just Kenya, right? So I think it will be very interesting to maybe also for your future research or someone else to explore this dimension that there's database with different countries. And I guess these countries differ with respect to adoption of mobile money. So it's also something that brings some variation, which might be a way to identify exactly the effect on corruption. And I believe there will be also added value in doing this across more countries. Yeah. In any case, thank you very much, Laura, again for your presentation. Very interesting and very useful research. And clearly there's not much done so far on this subject. So I think you have lots of work to do continuing along this path. And good luck with the publication. So for everybody else, I would like to announce another seminar, which will be in 2 weeks from now. It will be also on mobile money. So Laura, you're also welcome to join. It will be about saving lives through technology, mobile phones, and infant mortality in Africa, presentation by a colleague from the World Bank. Thanks again, everyone, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, and bye-bye.